Okay, hello everybody, and welcome to BPM232, first week. I'm Anderson Todd. I've already posted a short introduction video just to get you kind of acquainted with who I am. And so for this particular lecture, we'll be keeping things fairly short. This is the first week. I have no intention of roaring at full speed out of the gate, since our subjects, both therapy in terms of psychology and also Buddhism, are contemplative and designed to be sort of absorbed in a contemplative fashion. So I don't want to rush things. You'll notice in the syllabus when we get there that there are no assigned readings for this week. So for today, I wanted to do a little bit of an introduction, the video of which I posted. I wanted to talk a little bit about the framework for this course. And then I figured we would just go briefly through the syllabus, or I will go through the syllabus, and just give you a sense of sort of the flow of the course, right? What the various lectures and so on and so forth will focus on, and also the assignment structure. So as I mentioned, it is relatively kind of light for today. I posted already in the announcements on Quarkus that the first 4 weeks of the course will be online asynchronous. As it currently stands, the university's plan for large classes such as this one is to have them temporarily online. And the plan as it stands is that after that period, we will resume in-person classes. However, obviously it can't be lost on people that the last 18 months of pandemic, give or take, have been somewhat unpredictable. And very often it's been the case that, although we have wanted to advance things in certain ways, COVID has had very different ideas about this. So I'm keeping an open mind. I've sort of programmed it both ways. In theory, things will be migrating into the classroom. That is sort of the university administration plan. But in the event that we are waylaid, we may have to continue. So if we have to continue online asynchronous, so be it. That's unfortunate in some ways, but actually offers some interesting opportunities in other ways. However, for the time being, the first 4 weeks will be online asynchronous. I will post up the lectures, much as I have done today, so that you have an opportunity to watch them on your own time. You know, people are probably coming in from different time zones, et cetera, et cetera. So I want to make sure that they're sort of available to you. And I will endeavor to have them all sort of posted up online and the links posted in Quarkus, so that if indeed you have this particular time period for the class set apart, you may watch those lectures during that time, watch them at your leisure. But as I said, this first week is a somewhat slow week in any event. So I already introduced myself. I'm Anderson Todd. About this course more specifically, I mentioned that I am an alumnus of this program, the Buddhist Psychology and Mental Health program. And in some ways, that experience that I had in my undergraduate formed one of the real cornerstones, I think, of my education. It exposed me to a lot of material that I was familiar with. I was quite familiar with various traditions, but the program brought to light a certain view, okay, of Buddhist psychology and mental health. And you really get it right there in the title. We're talking about Buddhist psychology, but what does that mean in the context of the course? What I'm going to propose to you is this. Buddhism represents a very rich tradition, okay? There are many different Buddhisms, as we'll describe, right? It has many different cultural forms. It's become sort of syncretic. It's melded together with other traditions as it has spread out from its origination in India 2.5 millennia ago. And as those forms have proceeded, it's picked up a variety of other kinds of cultural material and techniques, but it has retained one very important central focus, which is that it is intended as a method for us to reduce suffering collectively and individually. That is the core focus of Buddhism, the reduction of suffering. Now, it has a particular focus on how to do this, and that may differ between the various kinds of traditions and schools, as we'll see. But that reduction of suffering and the power that an individual has within these traditions to intervene on and reduce their suffering is the kind of invariable backbone that passes through all these traditions. Now, psychology, and when I say psychology here, I don't merely mean sort of academic experimental psychology. I mean psychotherapeutic psychology, the psychology of treatment, shares a very similar set of aims, right? It aims at the reduction of suffering. Whether you frame this as sort of mental illness or neurosis or just the various difficulties of life, there's a recognition likewise within these various psychological streams, right, that life is hard. And there are some features of life that are intrinsically difficult for humans, things that we confront that cause suffering. And so psychology, right, certainly for the last 100, and with the idea of trying to understand the human mind, right? Trying to understand, say, our unconscious and behavior as a way trying to figure out how we can intervene back on ourselves to reduce suffering. So those two ideas are very in common. And there are many forms of psychologies, different psychotherapies, which we'll discuss. And there are likewise many forms of Buddhism, but they share that core. And that core is about an increased degree of self-understanding, an increased degree of understanding and insight into the world as a means of reducing suffering. So I think you'll see that that particular lens of looking at things, which the program in this course is focused on, is a very rich way of looking at the subject. Now, there is a great deal of debate, which we are certainly not going to resolve, we'll discuss, about the best way to think of Buddhism. Is Buddhism or Buddhisms a religion, a philosophy, style of thought, a set of techniques? In some sense, it's all these things, okay? It doesn't easily fit inside a box. The fact that we want to put a label on it and call it Buddhism one thing, or even Buddhisms, right, is not very reflective of the extremely varied cultural traditions and practices that we find through the various human groups that practiced it and the spread of it over time. Likewise, psychology and psychotherapies are a very, very diverse set of assumptions, right? Although they have some ideas in common, they also differ extensively in terms of their theory about how the human mind works, how suffering works, how we can overcome that suffering, right? How we can, in a sense, act to intentionally appropriate our own self-development, intentional self-transformation. But you'll see again that there are a number of linkages between these things. There is a sort of pattern of thought, even where they differ significantly, and we'll look at those differences too. But even where they differ significantly, right, both Buddhisms and psychology share this idea of reducing suffering. When I went through the program, my experience was that these courses, perhaps more in some ways than almost any other courses I took at the university, touched me in a very direct and existential sense, okay? There were a lot of courses that I did, and I was lucky. I had an education very much to my liking. So, between cognitive science, Jungian theory, and Buddhist psychology, I had a very rich field to draw on. But in particular, it was a focus on something that was, in some sense, beyond the merely academic. And that's something that was echoed by a large number of my peers and classmates. And later, when I was involved in the program, I heard it a great deal from students, that there was something special about this approach, because it wasn't just a question of, rote memorization of a bunch of material that you then, spit back on one exam and promptly forget, right? Or sort of check boxes for a credit that you were going down that then had no further impact on your life. Rather, it was touching on some of these fundamental human questions, and that people often found it personally very useful, very transformative. So that's an emphasis that I frankly like to bring to bear to all of my courses. It's important to me that the courses that I teach not merely be interesting, although I hope that they are interesting and you find them interesting, and that they not merely be, a credit in a sequence of credits towards a degree, towards a career, whatever. It's less of a way station in that sense, and more of an opportunity to engage in an exploration of what large groups of humans have done to encounter these fundamental human issues, right? Around suffering and around flourishing, right? Around the opportunities and potentials for us to really kind of grow and what that means, right? What the potentials are for us as individuals and collectively as a species. So that, I hesitate to use the term life-changing. You do sometimes see that. I don't know if I can make any claim to be life-changing. That seems like a pretty high bar, and seems like I'd be asking for trouble if I didn't engage in humility there. But certainly, I hope that as we take the opportunity to encounter this material, you do find that it connects up with your life and your experience and gives you valuable perspectives and valuable tools that you can engage, not just academically, but that you can use to engage the process of being human, right? And finding your way forward. So that was very much what I found when I was in the program, and it's an emphasis that I like to place in my courses as well. For this course in particular, I know that because this is something of an interdisciplinary course and it's a minor, and the students are coming in from a wide variety of backgrounds, it's a big class, more than 200 students, people are going to be coming in from all over the place. There are going to be people coming in from, English, from science, from psychology, from cognitive science, lots of cog-sci kids, right? From religious studies, from sociology, people will be coming from all over the place, okay? And so I also understand that as a second year course in this kind of interdisciplinary course, right, that not everybody is going to have the same degree of footing in sort of the ideas around Buddhism or the ideas around Buddhisms and psychologies, right? Some of you, of course, will have already done a fair bit of reading. You'll be somewhat familiar, okay, with the ideas around Buddhism and with the ideas around psychology. Others of you may in fact be practicing Buddhists, and you may have direct experience, okay, with psychology. But for many of you, this may be your first, encounter with these ideas. You may have come across them, right, seen ideas here or there, or have some notions about it, but not really had an opportunity to sort of directly access these ideas and find out what it's all about. So the course, as I'm teaching it, is very much structured to take that into account. I am less concerned at some level, okay, with trying to get an encyclopedic notion of these various Buddhisms and psychologies, right? I don't think that there's a lot of use to overloading, okay? Because it is possible to take up so much information that you don't properly categorize it and integrate it, right? It doesn't, you never connect to that material. Rather, the approach that I want to take in this course is to try to get into some of the fundamental principles and fundamental ideas, but to do so in a way that is not merely intellectual, okay, but also takes into account an existential and phenomenological perspective, an existential and phenomenological perspective. What do I mean by that? Well, what I mean by that is that Buddhism isn't a dry academic theory at the end of the day. It's a lived set of practices in a living community, right, that has evolved over time and space to serve many people's needs. And likewise, right, psychology, when we're talking about psychology in the sort of psychotherapeutic sense that we'll be discussing it, likewise isn't a dry set of academic ideas, right? It is meant to be an applied system of understanding self and other. It's meant to be a way of intervening to improve your life. Necessarily, what that means is that understanding it requires connecting it through to your own life. And in that sense, we are in luck, because as human beings, we have much more in common than we have different. Now, there are differences, and those differences matter, right? There are differences between people, and those need to be respected. And those differences, of course, are important, right? A very small difference can actually lead to a relatively large misunderstanding if it's not foregrounded. But underneath that, our shared heritage, okay, both sort of cultural in terms of our assumptions, in terms of our genetics, okay, it shares an enormous amount, right? We have a great deal in common with each other. So even where it's difficult sometimes to convey an experience to somebody that has not had that experience, it is in fact possible to do so. It's possible to understand other people's experiences, right? That is sort of one of the foundation stones that we'll be dealing with. We are in some sense very interior beings, right? Nobody can ever truly know our mind in some sense, right? And people aren't telepathic. And yet we can attain a measure of understanding of other people. We can attain a measure of understanding of ourselves. It is possible, in fact, to get useful and actionable information. And I would propose that that information is, in fact, one of the precursors of wisdom, okay? And not merely sort of just like intellect, not merely rationality, intelligence, but wisdom, the ability to skillfully move through life and to cultivate those qualities that make life worth living, make life better, right? Enable us to connect to people and to the world. Necessarily, that means that, you know, as we're encountering this material, I'm going to be placing a lot of emphasis on trying to convey these concepts in a way that is accessible. It means that we'll be going somewhat slower, okay? So one of the things that I have done, in fact, in all of my courses at this point, all of my courses at this point is I've removed tests and exams, okay? Why? In my experience and in my opinion, there are certain subjects that are well suited to timed examination, okay? So an example that I might give here is like medical school, okay? When your doctor is doing their, you know, tests for medical school, you want them to be able to respond in a relatively short period of time on the basis of information. You want them to have a certain kind of response curve because they might be in an emergency situation where they have to identify a problem and make a decision fairly quickly, right? And so timed examination makes sense. There is a time pressure in the real world, and the examination is designed to reflect that. But for many subjects, in my opinion and experience, that timed examination is not actually very reflective of how that knowledge would be deployed in the world. So for instance, as I mentioned, in addition to these courses, I also teach courses in the interdisciplinary courses in Jungian theory, okay? So Carl Jung and depth psychology and so on and so forth. And as I like to joke, it's very unlikely, it seems to me, that the time will ever come in your life when somebody will say, interpret this dream metaphor or the bomb goes off, right? Which is a kind of timed examination problem. Likewise, I don't want to be exploring this material together in a way where it is a strict question of memorization. That is a relatively shallow form of learning, right? To just memorize and spit it back. You can memorize and spit back 50 terms, right? 50, you know, Sanskrit or Pali words and their meanings, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you've understood, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that it's touched you. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have a felt experience of what it is that we're talking about. So the emphasis here is on this slower and more exploratory pace, less material, more depth. So that is the approach that we'll be taking in the course, okay? It's less overall material in some sense, but with depth. Now, I assure you that still is going to require effort on your part, okay? But it won't be the same kind of effort as, you know, like cramming for a bio test or something, right? It's going to require a degree of, you know, like working through the understanding of something, comparing it with metaphor and analogy until you try to get a grasp of it, comparing it to instances that you see around you or examples that are given, right? Until you get a very deep felt sense of it. And that's the position that I want to take for this course. So with that in mind, there are a few things that I'd like to sort of touch on before we get into things. That's the general overview. Next week, we're going to start into the, you know, whatever lecture material proper. We'll be dealing with some of the history around this material, right? The history of Buddhisms and some of the kind of key features that we need to understand. I'll be doing that again with the idea that people are coming in with a very wide degree of knowledge, okay? So I'm treating this as a fairly introductory course, but the emphasis again is depth. I want not that people internalize and spit it back out, right? Not that they memorize what I say and spit it back out. What I want is that people sit with it, that you chew, that you digest, that you internalize it, okay? And that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to agree with everything. This is the academy. The whole point is that we are supposed to usefully disagree with each other. That's what we're all doing here, right? We collaborate and we disagree. That's what the academy and the university are for. So you don't have to agree with everything, but you do have to sort of apply reasoned standards, right? So you're probably far enough in university at this point that you have some sense of sort of the rules, right? You have to make arguments, right? You have theses, you have arguments, right? You provide evidence and so on and so forth. One difference for this class is going to be that often, because this material is going to be sort of experiential and philosophical, the kind of evidence that you're using isn't always just going to be like a quick citation or a scientific paper, right? It might not be quite that wrapped up. You may have to approach things in a slightly more roundabout way, and that's okay. The course material and the assignments are designed specifically to accommodate this kind of reflective work. And I think that that is extremely important, as I've said. So no tests, no exams, but the expectation is that the time that you would normally be spending, I don't know, studying or cramming, right, is instead going to be spent in contemplation, right? You're going to read the readings, you're going to watch lectures, you're going to contemplate the material. Now, I will say right off the bat that I have a particular policy with regard to lecture, and it feels a little bit at odds actually here with this course because it's a second year course, but I'm going to share it anyway. My opinion on lecture is this. I don't think that students should be required to take everything that I say as absolute gospel. I am an individual. I have my own perspectives, and necessarily I have my own biases and interests, right? I have my own perspective on this, and I recognize that, right? Again, in the same way as you may disagree with much of the material in the course or agree with it, you may disagree or agree with much of what I say. That's fine. That's okay. I assure you, and I will continue to assure you, that I don't mind getting into conversations. In fact, I enjoy it. That's one of the reasons that I like having it. I like having debates. And I don't think that all of these questions are answered. Some of the questions that we're going to be touching on in this course are big questions, right? They're not sewn up. It's not 2 + 2 = 4, right? It's not a mathematical equation that we can easily come to the answer to. This is an open question, and it is an open human project, right? And so your opinions and thoughts about this, right, are valuable, right? You are contributing to this ongoing project by engaging with it. So, the idea is you're sort of internalizing. How does this fit in with lecture? Well, the lecture necessarily is going to be my perspective. I'm going to do these lectures in an attempt to try to animate and illuminate and enliven and explain. I'm going to try to take some of these concepts that we deal with in the course and to some extent bring them to life and give you an opportunity to connect them with your own experience, right? With your own felt experience. However, I am deeply opposed to the idea that I should be treated as some kind of absolute word, okay? I'm not. I have reasoned opinions, and I know things that I know, right? So I have a reasonable confidence, and I will present arguments to that effect. But in theory, you could go through this entire course and never watch one of my lectures. In theory, okay? I won't be taking attendance. It's not required. If you decide that you super have to catch up on sleep or something, I'm not going to give you the side eye if you don't come to lecture or don't watch the lecture. The lectures are for your benefit, okay? But they're not, strictly speaking, a requirement. You could theoretically just do the readings and to do the assignments and do just fine in the course, okay? However, these are here both for your edification, to try to explain things and enliven things, as I said, but also I place a pretty high premium on trying to make it interesting. My basic opinion about education is simple. If I find something interesting and I can communicate why I find it interesting, then other people will also find it interesting. And I, generally speaking, prefer to teach on subjects that I think are interesting, things that are significant, things that matter to me personally, okay? Because that connection to myself, right, to my own past, to my own psychology, to my own emotions, to my own lived experience, is what connects me to this material. It's not a dry academic subject for me. It's a living subject. So I will endeavor to be interesting. Again, I don't want to claim it would be sheer hubris, okay, for me to claim that I guarantee I'll be interesting. I have it on good authority that students often find my lectures entertaining. This one I'm deliberately trying to slow down. I normally talk about twice as fast. But I understand, right, that everybody's tastes are different. So I will try to be interesting, and I will try to be useful, and I will try to expand the material for you, okay? But you shouldn't feel beholden. We are all adults here, and I understand. I was an undergrad. I remember what the time pressures are like, and I'm very sensitive and compassionate about these issues. Sometimes you're just, not gonna come to class. That's fine. You're an adult. Right? I'm not a grade school teacher. We don't need to get into that. Okay. So that's my attitude towards lecture. It's kind of an adjunct because there is no test and no exam, right? It's not that you're just going to watch the lectures and those are the answers. You take them down, you spit them back up. Okay. It will be a mode of exploration along with the papers that we look at, along with the discussions that we have, and along with the assignments that you do. These things together are going to inform your personal project of trying to integrate and connect to this material, okay? So that will be a little bit different for some of you than courses that you've done in the past. But it's designed to kind of work together so that, the lectures are interesting and they're providing an interesting angle on this material, and that you can use that to connect together with the readings and to connect together with your own experience and the work that you're doing, and to connect together with other students in the course, who are also an extremely valuable resource as we all move forward and explore this together. On the note of hubris, as I've said, I am not some ultimate authority. I'm a human being like you. I have human foibles like you. If that was not clear, I will make it abundantly clear. Okay, I'm a human being. I have my own issues, psychological and physical. As I mentioned to all of you, I was unexpectedly having surgery last week. So my sense of my sort of physical limitation is very foregrounded right now. And to be honest, that's quite useful actually for a course that involves Buddhism. But I am not the ultimate authority, okay? And the reason I am not the ultimate authority is that I'm going to propose to you that there is no ultimate authority. There is no ultimate authority. I don't think that there is any single one correct, right, one-size-fits-all answer, okay? Now, that doesn't mean that things can't be sort of more or less useful or more or less accurate, okay? There are going to be some interpretations of the material that we will encounter where I think people have often sort of missed some of the key points of the material, okay? And it can be very easy in both psychologies and Buddhism to misinterpret things or to take those things and fit them to a particular kind of view that maybe is not especially square with the core of the material as it sort of is originally presented in the Buddhist sutras and as we find in practice, right? So it's not anything goes, but it's also not the case that I am the one true way, okay? Because I basically propose that there is no one true way. The reality is not like that, I don't think, nor are humans. You may disagree with this. That's something we can disagree about if you disagree. I'm happy to have that debate. But that is my approach to things. So before we get into the syllabus proper, there is sort of one recommendation that I want to make to people. So as I said, I'm aware that people are coming in with a wide variety of familiarity with Buddhism and with sort of psychologies. On the Buddhism front, I'm going to make a recommendation. This is not a textbook, okay? It's not a required reading. It's just a recommendation. And the recommendation is this. Whether you know your way around Buddhism quite well, or whether you've never heard anything about it, you know nothing about it, or you feel like you know nothing about it, you probably know more than you think. But, regardless, I'm going to recommend a very introductory book, okay? Now, the introductory book in question, and those of you that have done courses with me before will know that I am a fan of this series of books, is Introducing Buddha, a graphic guide. This is widely available at bookstores. You should not have a hard time, and it is not expensive. It is a very simple, very accessible, very direct set of explorations about Buddhism. When I make these recommendations to people, sometimes they're surprised. I am a great lover of books, if that was not obvious, okay? My home library is, I think, coming up on 5,000 volumes. I'm a big fan of books and a big fan of reading. And I'm kind of an intellectual omnivore. I enjoy sampling a wide range of things. I love ideas and connections and insights and, penetrating thinkers, right? It's wonderful to encounter the genius of the people who came before me. So people are somewhat surprised when I recommend something that to them maybe seems, sort of simplistic, right? I own probably about 40 of these. Now, I have lots of other books at various degrees of depth, but I own about 40, not 40 copies of the Buddhism one. I mean, different introducing guides. In fact, can I tilt up here? Yeah. Okay, see that up there? That's like a stack of them right there. And I think there's another stack someplace in here. Anyway, they're all over the place. I've got them scattered all over. Why do I have these? I have them because even though I have a great deal of familiarity with the subject, and I have considerably deeper readings and books and things that I can access, what I find is that the beauty of these is that you can basically read through the whole thing in an hour or two with a cup of tea or a cup of coffee on a Sunday afternoon. That's invaluable. What you're going to get is a high-level synthesis, okay? Well, it's a high-level synthesis. It's not going to go into enormous depth, okay? But it's going to cover a relatively broad range of things. I even recommend rereading this, right? More than once. Each successive pass, like any good book, right? Books are often worth rereading as films, good ones, are worth rewatching because you get more and different material, right? When I reread a book, the first time certain aspects may foreground to me. I read it a few years later and my life has been different and different aspects of it jump out to me or my understanding has changed, right? The rereading of books, even in a relatively short period of time, can bring out very different aspects and depths and connections of information. So I do recommend this, okay, regardless of what your level is. It's not a required reading, it's not a textbook, but I strongly recommend it because it'll give you a kind of baseline footing that you can then connect in other material as we go. Now, as I said, we are going to attempt to do reasonable sort of introductory stuff on concepts, but it is a single half course. And we have, a relatively large amount of stuff to cover. So you may find that this helps you kind of connect things together and so on and so forth. So it's a strong recommendation. And it's a recommendation that I follow up myself. I have loads of these and I have them on subjects that I am extremely well versed in. I have, I think, 2 copies of Understanding Jung. And I've been teaching Jung nonstop for a bunch of years. I've read the collected works. I know my way around quite well. Nevertheless, there is still a value in going back and going to one of those texts where you can sort of, skim through it relatively easily and digest it relatively simply, right? As a way of refreshing your mind, as a way of fitting information together. So that's a pretty strong recommendation, okay? I would say get yourself a copy, regardless of your level, and give that a read, okay? That will help. Okay, so on to the syllabus. So, I'm Anderson Todd. I already went through this. Please call me Anderson. I'm not a doctor, and I am an assistant professor, but you don't need to call me professor, and you don't need to call me Mr. Todd. Mr. Todd isn't even really my father. It's like my grandfather or something. Anderson is fine. Okay, I prefer Anderson. I will likely, if you are okay with it, use your first name. Yeah, so Anderson is fine. We're all human beings here, okay? I want to try as much as possible to remove some of the power imbalance that the university bakes into these things. There is some power imbalance, obviously, right? I'm the instructor. Ultimately speaking, your work has to be graded. That's how the university works, somewhat unfortunately, okay? I do not always agree with this, but that's how university works. So there is some power imbalance there. But as much as possible, I want to be able to connect with people in a more basic human level. I, like you, I'm moving through life with a set of conundrums and so on and so forth. And I try to really front and center a compassionate position. I remember what it is like to be a student. And I remember that, frankly, life is not always easy. So we will touch on much of this as we go through and general compassionate policies. But the front line of that is Anderson. Just Anderson is fine. Okay. So I'm Anderson. Office hours. I will hold office hours for this course on Friday from 2 p.m. to 3:30 p.m. Okay. Sometimes I'll go a little over if I've got time, but 2:30 to 3:30 is the scheduled time. I will post up a link in the announcements, okay, that will tell you how to schedule that time. Because it is such a large class, I am going to have to use an online booking system. I will likewise use, I will likely use You Can Book Me, okay, which will allow you to book like a 15-minute slot. So if you're booking in for office hours, if things are wide open and nobody is there, I'm quite happy to have discussion about all manner of things. I think you'll find I'm very interested in a large number of subjects. But if you have something that's relatively course specific, you are struggling with a concept, you are trying to figure out sort of how to move ahead with an assignment, et cetera, book in for a 15-minute slot. I will post that link up, and that's mostly what office hours are for on Friday. Now, I already mentioned, right, the first 4 weeks of this course are online asynchronous. So we'll post up lectures, right, and go from there. Thereafter, presumably we'll be in the classroom. So you will also have the opportunity to interact with me there. There are also 3 teaching assistants for the course, Dorina, Malika, and Samantha. So the way that the TA assignment will work, okay, is that each of the teaching assistants will be in charge basically of a third of the class. Like you'll have an assigned TA who is your primary point of contact, okay? Each of the teaching assistants keeps different hours. We've managed to spread things out so that we have either class or office hours between the 4 of us, literally 5 days a week. Not on the weekend, because not on the weekend. Weekends are sacred. The idea that they hold some exams on Saturday strikes me as enormously offensive to you and to the instructors, but we won't have an exam, so it doesn't affect us. The point is 5 days a week, okay? So Dorina will have office hours on Thursdays. You can see this on the first page of the syllabus, okay? Malika will have office hours on Tuesdays. Samantha will have office hours on Mondays, and I will have office hours on Fridays, okay? Your TA should be your first point of contact, okay? So if you need to reach out, if you need to ask a question, if you need clarification, try to go to your TA first. It's okay if you want to book in with me too, but as you can understand, there are more than 200 people in the course. And so things get pretty tight, especially when we are getting further in the year. And this is not my only course. And I also have a full private practice, and I also do research. And also I try to sleep and maintain a life, and so on and so forth, okay? So your TA should be your first point of contact. Those will be assigned alphabetically. I'll put up an announcement on Quarkus that will sort of lay it out. So where you are in the alphabet will determine who your core TA is, okay? And I will likewise link their office hours in that announcement, and I will link their Zoom link. Office hours, until things settle out, perhaps, will be on Zoom, so they'll be virtual. That, in fact, even once we get back to in-classroom, the virtual office hours, in fact, I think have been quite beneficial for people, because it means that if you don't have something else to do on campus, you don't have to hustle down to come to the office, right? So we will be conducting office hours virtually in that way, okay, by Zoom. You can see on the front page of the Buddhist Psychology syllabus, my Zoom and my email link, okay? And likewise, you can see the email for each of the TAs, okay? So keep your eye on that announcement, figure out where you are on the alphabet, and that's sort of who your primary point of contact will be, okay? If you are looking to reach out to me, I suggest that you do so through Quarkus first, okay? Don't use my email first. If you do use my email, okay, if you choose to use my email, please use the one that is listed on the syllabus. I have like 12 email addresses or something, okay, and they're from different streams and different projects. So use my U of T email address that is listed on the syllabus, and make sure that you put the course code in the subject line, okay? Make sure that you put the course code in the subject line. That's one of the ways that I sort of sort through the amount of mail that I receive. So if it's not there, I may miss it. So make sure that you put the course code in the subject line when you contact me. I'll also say that if you're contacting by email, right, or by Quarkus, it should be relatively brief questions. If you send me sort of a page of stuff and it has 35 questions, that might be very interesting. I imagine it will be, but I may not have time to respond to all of those in depth, okay? So if you have more than about 5 lines, then probably what you actually want is a meeting. You actually want an office hour meeting, okay? If it's a relatively brief question, then email is fine. For common questions, when I receive them by Quarkus or email, I will often ask people if they are comfortable with my sharing their question and the answer without their name, okay? It would be anonymized. But for common questions, it means that I can post them up on Quarkus so that, there aren't sort of 60 people asking the same question and getting that individually. So keep your eye, I will create a thread. And so for questions that I'm receiving a lot, I will answer them there. Check there first, okay, before you ask the question. So you do need to make sure that you're staying on top of Quarkus. You need to make sure that you're staying on top of the announcements, okay? And if I have already answered that question, I will direct you accordingly, but take a look there first, right? It's a lot more efficient for all of us if it's a common question. And there will be common questions. I am as fallible as anybody, and I'm sure that there will be points of interpretation that people will be stuck on. I have never yet taught a course where people didn't have questions where I was like, oh, I thought that was clear, but maybe it wasn't clear. That's okay. I encourage that. So, but if you ask a question of that kind, I may ask you if it's okay if I anonymize your question and post it up so that I can answer it accordingly. Okay, that's the communication side. So let's just read the course description really quickly, and then we'll get into kind of a few pieces around that. So, course description. Buddhisms, plural, represent a trove of 25 centuries of human introspection, existential self-discovery, and intentional self-transformation. They're a shared living tradition of explorations which seek to enable people to use compassion in achieving acceptance and self-understanding, thus renewing their deep connection to being, the world, and each another. That's a typo. Well, each other is what I meant. I'll maybe fix that. The core of Buddhisms, however, originated in and remains addressing and mitigating suffering. To approach this problem, Buddhists across many cultures and times have developed, refined, and employed an array of cognitive and imaginal disciplines, embodied techniques, philosophical realizations, and ethical and cultural frameworks. The Buddhist approach to intentional self-transformation, however, remains a deeply human project, sensitive to our common ground, while remaining flexible towards our individual differences and individual needs. In parallel, scientific psychology and the practice of psychotherapies share these aims of penetrating understanding of the human mind and the amelioration of human suffering, approaching the problems with their own rich hypotheses, theories, and techniques. The ongoing encounter and dialogue between psychology and Buddhisms has yielded a number of key insights, ranging from the rising importance of mindfulness-based therapies to reinvigorated methods of investigation into the nature and function of consciousness itself. Further, the Buddhist conception of existence as an ever-dynamic and ceaseless flux of transformations has helped open space for racialized and non-cisgendered persons to challenge conventional assumptions and categories imposed by modern societies. Hence, this course seeks to introduce the fundamentals of Buddhisms and psychology in an experiential way to explore and expand the intersection of the two. Course outcomes. The course aims to provide students concerned with the mental health implications of Buddhisms with an understanding of how major systems of psychotherapy found in Western cultures compare, contrast, and combine with Buddhist psychologies. Strong emphasis will be placed on the aspects of understanding human existence shared between psychotherapies and Buddhist philosophy and psychology. This grounded experiential exploration will be pursued to illuminate a proposed framework of wisdom that stands among the greatest shared treasures of the human species. So that was kind of what I said earlier, maybe a little pithier and with some typos, but that's the basic thrust of things, okay? So let's talk a little bit about evaluation. There are 4 grades in the course, okay, which you can likewise see in the syllabus. Quarkus discussion, sutra reflections, self-compassion synopsis, and your final paper. I'm going to talk about those a little bit now, and I will expand them more later, okay? But I'm going to talk about them a little bit now just to get you an idea. So the first thing, Quarkus discussion. Every week of class, I will pose a question or a provocation, like a discussion thread, okay, on the discussion section in Quarkus. And the idea is that you will respond, okay? This is not, primarily speaking, you don't have to provide like a huge academic essay, okay? But your response should indicate a certain amount of effort. You'll see the first one, which is just basically an introduction, and I dropped some cartoon and meme type things. I know it's pronounced meme. I meant meme with a Y. Anyway, I did a little bit of personalization, and I would encourage you guys to do the same. This is where your participation grade is emerging from, okay? It's participation in Quarkus specifically. The reason for this is that in-class participation is not equally easy for everybody. It's that simple. Extroverts may have an easy time throwing their hand up in the air, engaging in debate, asking questions, etc. But introverts often find this very difficult, especially in a large group, right? I know this because I am introverted. And although I do a pretty good job of riding the line towards extroversion, so much so that often people don't know, by and large, I am very aware of the difficulties that are faced by introverts, okay? So public setting stuff, I don't want to make participation contingent on that, okay? Hence, it'll be about your responses on Quarkus, okay? And the idea is that you'll respond weekly. There's a little bit of room for that, but the idea is that you'll be responding weekly in some reasonable way, and myself and the TAs will be checking in to make sure that you're doing that. That's 15% of your grade overall, okay? And it'll stretch for the whole semester, right? Across 13 weeks, 12 classes, 13 weeks, okay? That you will be sort of participating as we go. I hope that the questions will be sort of interesting, thought-provoking, right? In some cases, maybe a little challenging, that they'll give you things to think about and things to respond to. And I certainly encourage you to talk to each other as well. Insofar as you do so, however, it should go without saying that things need to remain civil, right? So there is a modicum of respect that needs to be maintained, okay? I expect people to be respectful of each other, okay? That means, no insults, no ad hominem attacks, no dismissals. Like, you need to engage each other with charitable, good faith, okay? Much as I will engage with charitable good faith, and I imagine when the TAs jump in, they will likewise, okay? So we're looking to have a good collaborative experience. This is not an attack forum, and it's not a debate in that kind of traditional sense. It's not about taking positions, but that doesn't mean you can't disagree, as long as you do so respectfully, okay? And that you sort of follow the rules of argument and evidence and so on and so forth. However, primarily what you will be sort of graded on, in a sense, is your response to the prompting question for the week. Okay, that is sort of the primary thing, and what you do above and beyond that is great. It's helpful, and it's part of the kind of community experience. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second thing, which is the second sort of grade, but the first sort of assignment due. It's due on October the 20th. It's worth 25% of your grade. And it's a sutra reflection, okay? So what does this mean? I will provide you, and as I said, I will expand each of these assignments, okay? Probably over the next week or so, I'll post them up. But you'll be provided with a list of potential sutras, where sutras are the texts which purport to record sort of the original teachings of the Buddha, right? These will be across a variety of traditions of Buddhisms. And the idea is that you will choose a sutra that sort of speaks to you, okay? There will be a bunch of options. You'll choose one that speaks to you. And then you will write a reflection, 1,500 words, okay? Using that sutra as a starting point. You'll read it in depth, right? And then you'll try to knead it, to digest it a little bit. You'll use that to connect it together with the readings in the course, things we talk about in lecture, things that come out of discussion, your own experience, your own learning. So the idea is doing a kind of in-depth exploration of a single sutra. Now, the sutras, some of them are quite short. And so you may wonder, like, how am I going to get 1,500 words out of this? And that is part of the question. It's like, you don't just want to be repeating yourself. You want to try to sort of go for depth, sit with it, okay? So there will be a variety of options. And as I said, I'll post up more details on that relatively soon. But that is the sutra reflection, okay? It's worth 25%, and it'll be due on October 20th, okay? The next assignment, which is due December 1st, so it's a ways down the road, right? Is your self-compassion synopsis. So what does this mean? So for students, for humans, for life in general, self-compassion and self-care are important. There are a lot of places in our society these days where people pay lip service to self-care and self-compassion, but in reality, they don't actually place any time or emphasis for this. That is something that I would like to change for this course, okay? Self-care and self-compassion are important. As you engage this material, you may be encountering some difficult ideas, right? Some difficult feelings. Some of the material that we're dealing with, I mean, at the end of the day, we are talking about things like suffering, right? That's going to have direct connections for you. And so I want to make sure that people are engaging in self-compassion and self-care. To that end, I'm making it an assignment to do so. So it's worth 25%. It'll be, the synopsis will be worth 25%. It'll be 1,500 words and it'll be due on December 1st. And to read the description, and again, I will provide more detail, okay, in a bit, but the active practice of self-care and self-compassion is an important component of the course and of life. Students will be encouraged to take up specific self-care and self-compassion practices, which might include meditation, body-based practices like yoga, compassionate social engagement or volunteering. At the end of the semester, you'll write up your experiences and experiments into a synopsis, either as a scientific research report or as a critical reflection paper. So again, as with the other assignments, you will have choice here, okay? Some of you will be more comfortable with the style of a critical reflection paper. Some of you will be more comfortable with a scientific research report kind of style, okay? Some of you will have less experience and therefore do that, right? You'll be sort of pushing yourself to engage in a new style. And I'll provide, along with the, the expanded description, I'll provide you with, some materials and sources and things that you can use to structure your thinking. But the basic idea is that you're going to take up some practices. You're going to set out to take up some practices. What am I going to do to engage in self-care and self-compassion? You're going to set time aside for it. You're going to put it in your schedule, right? It's going to be homework. It's going to be homework. And the idea around this, as you'll see more when I expand it, but is manifold. For one thing, students are, in my experience, incredibly hard on themselves, right? A lot of perfectionism, a lot of anxiety, procrastination, which emerges from anxiety, right? Lots of really, really high expectations, sometimes unreasonable expectations of themselves, right? And they can be remarkably self-critical. Now, everybody can be. Many people have a self-critical voice that just gets at them. And I recognize that that is a human thing. As a therapist, it's something I encounter all the time. So the idea here is that I want to make space within the course for you to be engaging in your own self-care and self-compassion. But because it is a course and it is an assignment, we have to do so in a relatively structured way, right? It can't just be sort of, whatever, blah, 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 blah. You need to sort of choose a set of things and engage with it. Okay, so you'll see more when I post up the extended assignment, but the idea is that you'll engage with this over the course of the semester and hopefully beyond. Okay, and then you're going to record in the form of this synopsis your results. You're going to talk a bit about what happened, how it was for you, how it worked. Was it difficult? Was it easy? And so on and so forth. Okay, now there are a variety of sort of options that I will present. Okay, but it's pretty flexible as an assignment. Okay, but the idea is that it is something like specific that you're undertaking. So there has to be sort of a rationale around self-care and self-compassion that you're using. And then you're going to write that up as a report in sort of one of two styles. Okay. So that'll be 1,500 words, 25%, due December 1st. And then the final assignment for the course is a big final paper. Okay. That'll be 2,000 words. It'll be worth 35%. Okay. And it'll be due December 8th, the last day of class. So for this assignment, okay, some of you will have a lot of experience with writing papers. Some of you may have not written a paper since high school English, okay? I will provide you with some sort of resources and guidelines. For those of you that find essay writing scary, I often think of the big three here, which are like, when you talk to somebody, it's almost anybody I talk to is either terrified of math, terrified of poetry, or terrified of essays, and sometimes all three, okay? I don't believe that any of those three needs to be scary, but I think that people do frankly get kind of traumatized earlier in their educational career against things. And so people have a lot of funny ideas about essays. As I will try to outline, if you already have a grasp and a facility with this, terrific, you're probably good, right? But if they make you deeply nervous and you're not sure where to go with them, I'm going to try over time to sort of unpack for you that, essay is derived from the French, SAA, to make an attempt. And in fact, what I will try to demonstrate at a few places is that really what you're doing is making a reasoned argument towards a thesis, okay, a structured reasoned argument towards a thesis, which is actually a thing that you do all the time, right? I used to teach essay writing to high school students, and I had a lot of, grade 9 boys. And one of the places that I would start that, as a very brief digression, is I would just start the essay writing stuff off without talking about essays at all, and just ask them the question, who would win in a fight between Batman and Wolverine? Now, virtually every student who I asked had a strong opinion about this, right? They would argue about it right away. And we would start taking down like da-da-da-da-da, right? Oh, okay, why? And they would give argument and they would give evidence. And right, once we finally had it organized, I would sort of say, okay, this is an essay, essentially speaking. You've asked a question, you've proposed a thesis, and then you've supported it with evidence and interpretation. It doesn't have to be that complicated, okay? And people get really wrapped up around it. So for those of you that are nervous about essay writing, I promise that I will offer you additional support, and I have sort of specific background in teaching essay writing. And I personally love essay writing. So, I promise that framework will be there. But for the final paper, for the final assignment, you'll choose one of 5 topics. So there will be 5 topics available to you. These are not totally fixed questions. You'll have a fair bit of flexibility in terms of how you choose to approach them. But there will be 5 topics, okay? And you're going to write an original argumentative paper, okay? Your paper must have a clearly articulated thesis or hypothesis, followed by a well-constructed argument or plan in support of that thesis or hypothesis, okay? So you're going to propose something, and then you're going to give argument, evidence, and interpretation in support of it, and then you're going to bring it together and conclude it, okay? Grades will be awarded, obviously, on the basis of how challenging the thesis is, and we'll talk a bit about challenging theses, the depth and appropriateness of research, okay? So the expectation is that you will do additional research beyond the readings in the course and beyond the lectures, right? You'll be required to do some research to follow up your ideas. Connection to course themes, so obviously being able to connect to the things that we're talking about, the soundness and originality of the argument, okay, and the clarity of expression and writing. A thing that I will say about all of this is I'm very sensitive to the demands that students feel are placed on them, right? Demands for success, demands to get certain grades, demands from family, demands to get into graduate school programs. It is an unfortunate reality that not everybody can have an A. That's just the way the university works. And it's not entirely a question of your internal effort, right? It is about a metric against sort of the skills of peers, expectations at grade level, et cetera, okay? So I understand that people will be distressed about things. And what I generally say in this respect is you should be less concerned about the grade, ultimately speaking, and more concerned about doing good work. Writing a good paper, and we'll unpack this more, isn't about a cookie cutter approach that is designed to like sell me specifically or your TA specifically. It's designed it's designed to be a process where you engage with the material in a way that is meaningful to you and that you come to believe in a persuasive fashion. So that's the approach we're going to take. My approach in all of my courses is that I have an intense preference for my students to write things they care about and believe in. If you get to the end of your paper and you like, who cares? I don't really give a shit, right? Or like, what's the point of this? Why does it matter? I don't know, right? Something has gone wrong, right? Ideally speaking, it should be something that you care about and connect to, okay? And so we will, again, go through methods of connecting with that. But that is the emphasis that I want you to have, okay? That is the kind of level of quality. There are a bunch of metrics that grading will be conducted by, okay? And to some extent, myself and the TAs will be there to help you workshop stuff, right? And kind of get a grip over things. But ultimately speaking, I would say try to de-emphasize, XYZ particular grade point average. I know that's difficult because, like, to a great extent, that's what you're here for. But what I would claim here is that there are more important things at the end of the day. School isn't life, right? And there is an opportunity for you to develop a set of skills, okay, but also to develop expertise. You can, through the writing of good work, actually become something of an expert, something of an authority, right? Everybody starts out doing this kind of work. And then as they move further into academia or whatever field, right, they acquire more stuff. So it's about presenting something that you care about, presenting something that you are arguing in a sort of sound, cogent, consistent fashion, right? That's what we're working towards. So that's the final assignment. So it's four pieces of grading. I mean, the quickest thing is an assignment, right? And I'll expand on each of these as we go. Okay. Before we get into sort of the week by week, okay, a little bit, I want to talk a little bit about lateness and extension policy. So, a number of you will have accommodations, and I'm receiving those now. Thank you for sending them. Generally speaking, I maintain a compassion-first approach to things. Okay, I maintain a compassion-first approach to things. People never believe me when I get into this. And I know for a fact that there are going to be students that don't quite absorb this because you've had previous experiences in the education system that have, traumatized you. Basically, you've learned to be distrustful. If you need an extension, just ask ahead of time. Okay. And it's not necessarily, you don't have to have a whole song and dance routine. You don't have to have 9 sick notes, right? There are all kinds of perfectly good, compassionate reasons why you might need an extension. Things are really bad at home. You just went through a breakup. Your pet died. Some particular event in your home country has you deeply, deeply upset. All kinds of things. You're having an upwelling of mental illness. And as I said, I'm a therapist. I'm very aware of this sort of thing. Or even you're just really crunched in and over your head. Or here's one for you, and this throws students every year. You have a horrible problem with procrastination and you just can't seem to get on the assignment. That's okay. You need to reach out, okay? You need to reach out because if you don't reach out and you don't submit anything, it's just a zero. There's no way around that. But if you reach out, okay, then arrangements can be made. Now, we won't just kick things down the road forever because that's not actually good for you, especially if you have procrastination. And when people are like, whoa, wait, you'll give an extension for procrastination? I myself have procrastination. And I do not understand why, okay, the school system insists on treating this as though it's a different category of mental event than various other things that are outside our control. Procrastination is a form of anxiety, and it's mostly outside of our control. I mean, initially, we can get it under control, and we'll probably talk about that. But, people aren't choosing mostly not to do their homework so that they can fall down a YouTube hole of cat videos till 3 a.m. They want to do stuff. They just find themselves horribly blocked. And I don't think that should be penalized as though it's a moral failure, which is essentially speaking what I think most policies do. Get it in. When I was your age, I had to do 9 essays in a day. I can't be bothered. Okay. So, but you need to reach out. And you need to reach out in good faith. That means reach out to your TA first. And if things have to, escalate to me, then that's okay. But you need to reach out to your assigned TA first, okay? Ideally, you need to reach out in advance. I understand that's not always possible, okay? Sometimes, it might be the case that you're suffering, depression and you can't get out of bed. Or you're super, super anxious and you're afraid of sort of punishment, okay? Because that's how people have been wired in, okay? But you need to reach out. You need to reach out. You don't have to explain everything about what's going on, but you need to reach out, okay? And again, that isn't just, you can kick everything down the road forever, but it can sometimes give you a little bit of breathing room to get back on top of things, to discuss, to talk to the TAs or myself about where maybe you're having difficulties, okay? So I want to really emphasize this, that this compassion first stance, I want you to have self-compassion, but also I think it's very important to have compassion. I remember what it is like to be a student, but also I'm a human being and life comes with a lot of curveballs, okay? And I don't think there's just no reason, as far as I can tell, to punish people because they're already having problems, okay? That's my policy. So, but you need to reach out. So there's a flip side to this. And the flip side is, don't bullshit me. What I mean by that is, there's a few forms of bullshit, okay? People who, occasionally people will slide around and give sort of bullshit answers. Another form of bullshit is the form of bullshit where people, turn in an essay that actually is very clearly plagiarized. And then they say, oh, I had no idea I couldn't just do my essay by copying and pasting big chunks of Wikipedia or some website. Don't do that. It's an academic offense. Don't do it. If you try to slip it past, okay, odds are I'm going to catch it. Sorry, I'm going to be a little harsh for a second. Odds are I'm going to catch it, okay? The reason I'm likely to catch it is that I cut through bullshit for a living. It's what I do academically to a great extent. It's what I do professionally to a certain extent as a therapist, and it's what I do often as a consultant, right, in business and organizational consulting. I cut through bullshit. I got pretty fine-tuned bullshit detectors, okay? However, even if your bullshit doesn't get caught, right? Even if you manage to slide it past, that's worse for you. It's worse for you. Why? Well, you might slip it by. Maybe, you did a really smooth job, or maybe the TAs or I was having an off day and didn't notice, like maybe. But if that happens, you're just going to get a warm, fuzzy, I got away with it feeling, right? And then that will reinforce the behavior, and then you'll do it again. And you'll escalate and you'll escalate. And somewhere down the line, it'll escalate to the point that you will get caught, and it will blow up in your face. And it's likely to blow up in your face with an instructor or whoever who's frankly considerably less compassionate about the subject than I am. Okay, so don't bullshit me. There is, I try to extend really and honestly, okay, a human field here. And that's hard for people to adjust to. They're not always used to it. Okay, I understand that. I have lots of students that tell me that this has not been their experience in education, but that's how it is here. Okay, but the corollary of that is that I extend a respect to you, and so I expect you to extend that respect back towards myself and to the TAs. Okay, you be respectful, and if you're respectful, we can work together to try to solve things. Okay, so good. That's that. If you don't reach out for an extension, there is a late policy, right? So, don't reach out 2 weeks later, or there will be late marks, obviously. But if you can reach out in advance, if you need a little bit more time is usually doable, okay? So I would encourage you to do so, and just reach out, explain a little bit. You don't have to get into your whole life story. You explain a little bit about what's going on, give a little bit of context, and things are flexible, okay? All right. Now, the readings, more briefly, the subjects. Okay, week 1. Well, here we are. Course overview, Buddhism and Psychology syllabus review. Here we are. Welcome. Okay, week 2, Life of the Buddha, key features of Buddhist psychology. So we'll be going through sort of this historical life of the Buddha and some of the mythology around the Buddha, but then also looking at some of these core structural features that we're going to be talking about. It'll be a bit of an overview, but we're going to start to get at some of that core stuff, okay? Week 3, the first noble truth. Okay, so if you're not familiar with Buddhism, you will be familiar with this idea, but the Buddha sort of proposed these 4 noble truths, a kind of diagnostic. Sometimes my friend and colleague John Vervaeke refers to them as the 4 ennobling provocations, which is an idea that we like, but we're going to stick with the more traditional noble truths here, even though I like that. So we're going to spend a week on each one. So, right, the first noble truth is an analysis of suffering. The second noble truth, the conditions of suffering. Third noble truth, when suffering ends. And the fourth noble truth, how to overcome suffering. Okay, and that'll take us up to week, 6. We'll be at the halfway mark. Okay, thereafter, October 27th, we're going to start looking at psychological contextualism. Okay, so we're going to look at the doctrine of dependent co-origination. We're going to spend 2 classes on that. Okay, that may be a bit arcane to you right now, and so we're going to unpack it a bit more, this idea of dependent co-origination, which is very important to the overall notions, philosophical and psychological, that we will be exploring in Buddhism. Buddhisms. Okay, then after those 2 weeks, we've got reading week. Don't come to class. don't come to office hours. I'm not going to. So that's a week off. By all means, catch up on your reading and your homework and whatever, but obviously it's reading week. Don't come to the school. Or if you do, don't come to office hours in class because I won't be there. Okay, November 17th, the nature of the self, part 1. And November 24th, the nature of the self, part 2. Okay, so this will be a further extension of some of the kind of core ideas and what this means. We'll be applying this backwards in a in a relatively kind of complex, interconnected way by that point, right? We'll have a lot of the basics in place. And so we'll be exploring the nature of self and what that means, okay, within these contexts and how it relates over to some extent, right, to these sort of Western psychologies and psychotherapies. Okay, then December 1st, we'll talk about Buddhist meditation, right? Mindfulness and loving kindness. So we will in fact talk about a number of different kinds of meditations and practices, but these two, mindfulness and loving kindness, are probably at this point kind of the best known. They've had a real resurgence in the West, kind of like Oprah Winfrey McMindfulness moment to some extent. And so lots of people have a direct association specifically between meditation and Buddhism. There's a lot more to Buddhisms than meditation, but nevertheless, these are an important part of how the contact between these traditional Buddhisms and the Western psychology has occurred, right? Mindfulness has become a kind of minor industry, and it's become or major industry maybe, and it's become sort of integral to a number of developing theories around things like therapy. So we're going to explore that more directly. We will in fact touch on that stuff a little earlier, because for those who are interested, it's certainly not a necessity, but taking up a meditative practice is a very direct way of trying to access this stuff. Won't be a requirement. Nobody is ever required to take up meditation. But for those who are interested, I'll provide some resources that can guide you on that if that's something you wanted to take, as for instance, for your self-care or self-compassion synopsis, right? So we'll deal with that. And we'll deal with it in a little bit more detail. We'll look at what there is to say about that. There are a few added things I will add. As I mentioned, my friend and colleague, John Vervaeke, I think, has a very penetrating analysis of meditation from a cognitive perspective. This is not a cognitive science course, but I think that there are nevertheless useful things to learn there that are not always reflected in the material. And so we may bring a bit of that to bear, time permitting. And then lastly, Buddhist Encounters, on December 8th, Buddhist Encounters, Psychotherapy and Science. So this is where we're going to try to push the envelope a little bit. Okay, we're going to look at some of the more current scientific and sort of neurobiological and neuropsychological work that has been done. There's been a lot of really interesting recent science that has sort of involved Buddhism, some of which you may be familiar with, the Mind and Life series, and there's been a lot of work with the Tibetan Buddhist community through the Dalai Lama. So there's been this encounter with science, and some of this is the ongoing, indeed centuries long, encounter between Western thinking, psychology and philosophy, and Buddhism, but also to some extent it's pointing forwards into new forms. And so we're going to talk about that, about where some of this may be going. I have a lot of interest in this place. I'm very interested in this kind of frontier and horizon of intentional self-transformation, and about what these systems can teach each other, right? How they can be sort of improved, right? Streamlined and fitted. So that's what we're going to cover. And that's a very brief overview, obviously. You'll note that there are readings for each week. I recommend you read them all. So the concepts that are here, I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through the individual readings. My expectation is that you are reading them. We will discuss them to some extent, okay? But the expectation is I've trimmed the reading list down pretty considerably. I'm trying not to bury you guys in reading, but you need to do the readings. So ideally, you'll have done these readings before class, okay? You'll have done these readings before class. And like I said, I've tried to keep it, 1 or 2 readings a week, tops, okay? But it's important you be keeping on top of this. The relationship is not always going to be one-to-one between the lecture and the readings, but gradually we're going to be exploring a set of territories, and I think you will start to see connections that are going to end up being very important for the writing and the research that you do, both in your final paper and in things like sutra reflection, et cetera, okay? Okay, and that will be 12 weeks. That'll be a semester. It will fly by. I almost guarantee it. It will fly by. So I am going to process this and post it up. That's it for this week. We'll meet next week. I will put up announcements, okay, so that you have some sense of your TA, okay, so that we can communicate in my office hours this week. I believe the TAs will start offering their office hours next week, okay? So I'll give you the information that you need for your TA, your assigned TA, right, and who you're getting in contact with, and also what you need to sort of book in if you want to come and introduce yourself. Next week, as I mentioned, because the first 4 weeks will also be online asynchronous. But what I'm going to try to do probably next week, okay, is record the lectures early enough that I can upload them earlier in the day, and then I'll make myself available for a chunk of time for the class. So if people want to drop in, chat, meet each other, etc., we can do that. I didn't do that this week, partly because I'm a little slower post-hospital, so I'm gearing back up, but also because, as I said, I very deliberately don't want to overload the first week. So this is plenty for week 1, okay? If you have questions, please feel free to contact me through Quarkus or email. In the meantime, keep your eye on the thing. I will continue to be posting announcements, and you really do want to read those and keep in touch with them. It's going to be important information. Yeah, and then I just thought I'd share this. This is so I like to make Buddhas. I made this Buddha as well. That's a 3D printed Buddha, which I painted for a game that I was doing. This one I also did for a game, but this one is special to me. It's a little dusty. It's a little dusty. We'll talk a little bit about the origin of the images of the Buddha and how they, in fact, emerge from an area of what is now Afghanistan called Bactria. They were originally based, in fact, on Greek statues of Apollo, of all things. But this is a statue that I did, which I called the Black Buddha at the time for a story game that I was running, in which I painted this with the darkest commercially available black paint in the world. So some of you may have heard of a black pigment called Vanta Black. You've probably seen this stuff. It absorbs like 99.9% of all light. It's like a black hole on paper. But it's a proprietary technique. It's controlled by an artist named Anish Kapoor, if I recall correctly. And so in response to this, an artist in the UK named Stuart Semple decided to develop his own, not as dark as Vanta Black, but his own incredibly dark commercially available black paint. And I've backed a few iterations of this. This one I believe is Black 3.0, making it the sort of darkest acrylic black paint in the world. Now, this Buddha is a little dusty, but one of the reasons, so he's a little bit more apparent, but if you put this thing inside of like a shadow box, which is how I originally had it, it vanishes almost into a perfect silhouette, okay? It sort of absorbs all that comes at it, right? It absorbs all the light that comes at it. I use this not infrequently as a kind of meditative object. And we'll sort of reference back to this sort of absorbing quality, right? And how that relates around. That's not super relevant. It's like not that you need to take notes or anything on it, but I wanted to kind of flag it because as you'll see, you know, you'll get a bit of a tour of my library in these first 2 weeks, and you'll see that my tastes and interests are extremely varied, but I place an enormous degree of respect and stock into some of these human beings who have discovered profound truths and insights about themselves, about all of us, about the nature of self-transformation. And although I am not, okay, I am not a religious Buddhist. I'm not a religious Buddhist. I nevertheless hold Buddhism with an enormous degree of respect, right? Much as I do many human traditions. But each human tradition in my experience has interesting contributions to make towards our shared existential project and towards the future. And I think that there is something really special and worthwhile about investigating these systems on their own terms, right? And figuring out like, why have these been sort of motivating the human heart and the human mind for 2,500 years? People are smart, so there are usually good reasons. So this was a bit of an art project for me, but I wanted to sort of highlight it just to talk a little bit about sort of my personal connection to this material, okay, and what it means to me, and what it means to be sort of in dialogue with the great sages, and to have those in dialogue with myself and my own development and history and science and all that good academic stuff. Okay, so there we are introduction-wise. and I'll put him right back on the shelf along with this Philosopher's Stone. Okay, so that's a bit of an introduction. Hopefully that wasn't too onerous for you off the bat. I will probably correct a couple of typos in the syllabus, but none of them appear to be crippling. And elsewise, keep your eye on the space. And once the announcements go up, I presume I will have an opportunity to meet a few of you this Friday during my office hours. Otherwise, I shall see you next week. And I hope you have a lovely weekend and a great week. And I genuinely hope that you enjoy the course. I'm looking forward to it enormously.